The station buzzed with the usual noise of travelers, traders, and soldiers. Lights flickered in the dim atmosphere of the bar, casting long shadows across the tables. Commander Jace sat alone, nursing a drink, his mind focused on the mission ahead. He was no stranger to the quiet tension of space stations like this, always on edge, always waiting for something to happen, but he hadn't expected it to be her. She walked into the bar like a storm, quiet but powerful. Her steps were confident, deliberate, and the moment she entered, the room seemed to pause. Eyes turned to her. It wasn't just her appearance, though she was striking, her presence was different. She carried herself with the ease of someone who had seen it all, who had fought battles that no one else would dare. Jace's gaze followed her as she moved toward the bar, her dark cloak flowing behind her. Her face was calm, almost serene, but there was something in her eyes, something wild, something dangerous. Those eyes locked onto his for a split second before she took a seat at the bar and ordered a drink, her voice low but commanding. Jace wasn't sure what it was about her that drew him in. Maybe it was the mystery, or maybe it was the way the others seemed to recognize her. A low murmur spread through the crowd as she sat down, and a few of the regulars shifted uncomfortably in their seats. He knew that look. She wasn't just anyone. She had a history, a dangerous one. As Jace took another sip of his drink, a group of men entered the bar. They were large, their movements heavy with aggression. The kind of men who didn't think twice about picking a fight. They moved toward her. Jace felt his hand tighten around his glass. His instincts, honed through years of battle, told him these men were bad news. And judging by the way they looked at her, she was no stranger to trouble. One of the men, a tall figure with a scar across his cheek, leaned over the bar and said something to her. His words were too low for Jace to hear, but the woman's response was clear. She didn't flinch, didn't back down. She simply turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. The tension in the air thickened. The man raised his voice, threatening her. The others stepped forward, their hands on weapons. Jace could see the flash of metal beneath their coats. This wasn't just a verbal dispute. It was a setup, and she was the target. Without thinking, Jace stood up. He didn't want to get involved, not with the mess he could see coming. But something inside him told him this was more than a fight. This was a storm he couldn't ignore. He moved toward the bar, stepping past the tables and chairs, his boots making soft thuds on the metal floor. As he approached, the woman's voice reached him, calm, almost amused. "Is there a problem?" she asked the scarred man, her tone smooth as silk. Jace stopped a few steps away, observing. The scarred man sneered, clearly taken aback by her composure. "You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be, lady. Walk away." The woman didn't move. She didn't seem worried at all. In fact, she didn't seem worried about anything. She sat there, her posture relaxed, and for a brief moment, Jace wondered if she had a death wish. But then she smiled. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but enough to set the scene in motion. The scarred man's hand shot out, grabbing her by the arm, trying to force her to stand. But she didn't flinch. She simply stood up, her movements swift and fluid like a dancer preparing for a fight. Jace's hand was already on his sidearm, his instincts kicking in. He wasn't about to let this escalate into something worse, but the woman had something about her, something that told him she wasn't going to need his help. The bar fell into silence. The few people who were still watching shifted uneasily, unsure of what was coming next. The scarred man's grip tightened, but before he could do anything more, the woman moved faster than Jace could follow. In one fluid motion, she twisted the man's arm behind his back, causing him to drop to his knees. He let out a yelp of pain, the sound sharp in the stillness of the bar. The other men lunged, but she was already ahead of them. She spun, kicking one in the stomach and sending him flying into a table. The others hesitated, their eyes wide with surprise. They hadn't expected this. Jace couldn't help but watch in awe as the woman took control of the situation. She moved like someone who had been trained for combat, someone who had been in battles far worse than this. With every move, she dispatched her attackers with ease, each strike calculated and precise. It was like watching a deadly dance, and Jace was the only one who hadn't been swept up in it. The fight was over in seconds. The men were all on the ground, groaning in pain, too stunned to fight back. The woman stood in the center of the chaos, breathing lightly, her eyes calm once again. Jace couldn't take his eyes off her. She was dangerous, no doubt. But there was something else there, something that intrigued him. She wasn't just a skilled fighter. She was something else entirely, something he hadn't seen before. She turned to him then, her gaze locking onto his, and for a moment Jace thought she could read his thoughts. "You're still standing," she said, her voice a low murmur. "Why?" Jace hesitated, his mind racing. "I don't like seeing a fight go to waste," he replied, his voice steady. He didn't know why he was answering her, but he couldn't stop himself. The woman didn't smile this time, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. "I'm not looking for trouble," she said, "but trouble always finds me." The words hung in the air between them for a moment before she turned to leave, her cloak swishing behind her. Jace watched her go, the weight of the situation settling over him. This wasn't over. Whatever it was only just beginning. As the doors slid shut behind her, Jace stood still, contemplating what had just happened. He wasn't sure if he was about to follow her into something he didn't understand, or if he was about to walk away from the one mystery he couldn't resist. But before he could make up his mind, he heard a voice behind him. "Commander Jace, you don't know it yet, but you're involved now." Jace turned, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. But there was no one there, only the lingering sound of the woman's footsteps echoing through the empty bar. Jace stood in the bar, the silence around him heavy, as the last echoes of the fight faded away. The woman, Lyra, had left, disappearing into the dimly lit corridors of the space station. He couldn't shake the image of her, the calm in her eyes, the way she moved with precision and power. It was as if she belonged to a different world, one Jace couldn't quite understand. He took a deep breath, trying to push away the thoughts swirling in his head. He had a mission to focus on, but something about the way she had looked at him, the way her voice had sounded, kept him rooted to the spot. Suddenly, a voice broke through his thoughts. "Commander Jace." He turned, startled. A man in a plain gray uniform stood behind him, holding a datapad in his hand. The man's face was serious, his eyes scanning Jace as if sizing him up. "Can I help you?" Jace asked, his tone steady but guarded. The man's presence was enough to remind him that he wasn't alone here, that there was still work to be done. The man nodded, stepping closer. "You're needed, sir. There's a situation." "The mission briefing—" "I know," Jace interrupted, his mind already on the task ahead. "But right now something else is going on, something strange." The man raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Jace could tell he was eager to get to the mission details, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his path was about to cross with Lyra's again. Something about her wasn't right, and he needed to understand more. The next few hours passed in a blur of routine. Jace went through the motions, gathering his team and preparing for the mission ahead. Yet his mind kept drifting back to Lyra, her eyes, her calm control in the face of danger. He knew he had to find out more about her, but how? As he walked through the crowded hallways of the station, his thoughts kept returning to the fight. Lyra had taken down the men in seconds with no hesitation. It was almost as if she knew they would attack, as if she'd been expecting it. And that wasn't the first strange thing about her. There was something otherworldly about her, something that didn't fit with the usual types of people Jace dealt with. He had been in the military for years, but he had never met someone quite like her. Just as Jace was about to enter the briefing room, he caught sight of her again. Lyra was standing in the hallway talking to someone. Her back was to him, but he could see the way her posture was relaxed, her hands at her sides, yet poised to act at a moment's notice. The person she was speaking to seemed nervous, his words quick and rushed. Jace hesitated, his instincts telling him to stay back. But something pulled him closer, an undeniable force that made him want to know more. As he approached, he caught the end of the conversation. "I don't want to cause trouble," the man said, his voice shaky. "But if they find out, they will," Lyra replied, her voice calm, almost too calm. "But you won't be around to see it." The man went silent, his face paling. He glanced nervously at the door, as though trying to decide whether to run or stay. Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Don't worry," she said softly. "You'll be safe. For now." Before the man could respond, Lyra looked up and caught Jace's eye. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lyra's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "You," she said, her voice low. "You're still here." Jace's heart skipped a beat. It was as if she knew everything about him, like she could see straight through him. "I'm not sure what's going on here," he said, his voice steady, but his thoughts were racing. "But I think you owe me some answers." Lyra gave a short, humorless laugh. "Answers? Maybe, but answers don't come free, Commander. You should know that by now." She turned to walk away, and Jace found himself following her without thinking. He didn't know why he couldn't just walk away, why he felt so compelled to find out more. Maybe it was the mystery in her eyes, or maybe it was the way she seemed so unaffected by everything around her. Whatever it wasn't something he could ignore. They walked together through the station, passing soldiers, civilians, and traders. Jace tried to think of what to say, but nothing seemed right. He needed to understand why she was here, why she was involved with people who were clearly dangerous, and more importantly, what she was running from. Lyra finally broke the silence. "I'm not what I seem," she said without looking at him. "But then neither are you." Jace blinked, surprised by her words. "What do you mean?" She glanced at him for a brief moment, her eyes sharp. "You think you're just a soldier. Just another man following orders. But you're more than that. You've always been more." Jace felt a strange pull in his chest, a sense that she was right, though he didn't know how she knew. He had spent years following orders, but there had always been a part of him that wanted more. A part of him that wanted to break free, to choose his own path. "Everyone has their own secrets," Lyra continued. "But some secrets are worth dying for." Jace stopped in his tracks. He could feel the weight of her words, heavy and real. "What do you want from me?" She turned fully to face him now, her expression unreadable. "I need your help. There's a place, a hidden base on a planet far from here. I have to get there. And I can't do it alone." Jace's mind raced. She needed him, that much was clear. But why him? What made him special? He was just a soldier, an experienced one, but not the kind of person who could help someone like her. "Why me?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a man doing his job." Lyra's eyes softened for a moment, but her voice remained steady. "Because, Commander, you're exactly what I need. You're someone who can understand the importance of what's at stake. You know what it means to lose everything. And you know how to fight for something worth protecting." Jace stood there, unsure of what to say. Her words hit closer to home than he expected. He had lost people, friends, comrades, people who had meant everything to him. And he knew what it was like to fight for something bigger than himself. But this was different. "How do I know I can trust you?" he finally asked, his voice low. Lyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "You don't," she said softly. "But you will." And just like that, Jace knew. He was already in this, whether he wanted to be or not. Jace's mind was still racing as he followed Lyra through the crowded hallways of the space station. The truth was, he didn't fully understand why he was doing this. Helping her? Agreeing to a mission that seemed more dangerous with every passing minute? It didn't make sense. But there was something about her. A quiet strength in her eyes, a calm that seemed to draw him in. And in a way, it felt like fate had placed them on the same path, even though he wasn't sure where it would lead. The two of them reached the hangar, where Jace's ship, a sleek military-grade freighter, was waiting. The familiar hum of the engines echoed in the vast space, and Jace felt a sense of purpose settle over him. He had been through countless battles, but this felt different. Lyra didn't speak as they boarded the ship. She simply moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the controls as if she knew exactly what she was doing. Jace didn't question it. He had seen enough to know that she was capable of handling herself in any situation. As they settled into their seats, the engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off the ground. The space station grew smaller and smaller behind them, fading into the vastness of space. Jace couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation building in his chest. This wasn't just another mission, it was something more, and he had no idea what awaited them on the other side. "Where exactly are we going?" Jace asked, his voice breaking the silence. He couldn't ignore the question any longer. He needed to know what they were getting into. Lyra turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "A remote planet. One that's off the radar. No one knows about it except for a few people in high places." Jace raised an eyebrow. "And you expect us to just show up?" She nodded. "It's the only place where we can find what I'm looking for. The only place where I can be safe for a while." Jace thought about that for a moment. "Safe from who?" Lyra's gaze turned cold. "The ones who are after me. The ones who would do anything to get their hands on what I know." Jace didn't need to ask more. He could hear the unspoken danger in her voice. Whoever these people were, they were powerful, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to find her. The ship hurtled through space, leaving the station behind. The stars outside the windows blurred as they traveled faster, the distance between them and the station growing wider with each passing moment. For a while, neither of them spoke. Jace found his thoughts drifting again to the events of the day, the fight in the bar, the strange pull he felt toward Lyra. He couldn't explain it. There was something about her that made him want to trust her, despite the danger. Maybe it was because she was so different from anyone he had ever met. Or maybe it was because he could see that she was more than just a fugitive running from something. There was something bigger at play here, and he couldn't help but feel that his involvement was somehow inevitable. The hum of the ship's engines broke his thoughts as the autopilot kicked in. The screen in front of them flickered, displaying the coordinates for their destination, a small, uninhabited planet on the outer edges of the galaxy. The kind of place where few people dared to go. A place that could easily be forgotten. How do you know this place? Jace asked, his curiosity piqued. Lyra looked over at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. I have my sources. People who helped me when I needed it. But no one knows what's hidden there. Hidden? Jace pressed. What are you looking for? Some kind of weapon? A hidden base? Lyra's lips tightened, and for a moment Jace thought she wouldn't answer. Then she leaned back in her seat and spoke, her voice low. Something more dangerous than any weapon, she said quietly. A piece of technology that could change everything. If the wrong people get their hands on it, well, you can imagine the consequences. Jace sat up straighter. What kind of technology are we talking about here? Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at the stars outside the window, lost in thought. The kind of technology that could turn the tide of the war. The kind that could give one side an advantage no one else could match. Jace felt a chill run down his spine. He had been part of enough conflicts to know how powerful technology like that could be. Whoever controlled it would have the upper hand. And if the enemy got to it first? So it's not just you they're after, he said slowly. It's the information you have. The knowledge about this technology, Lyra nodded. Exactly. Before Jace could say anything else, the ship shook. A sudden jolt ran through the hull, throwing both of them forward in their seats. Jace's hand automatically moved to the controls, and he saw the flashing red lights signaling a distress signal. Someone's following us, he muttered under his breath. He quickly scanned the sensors, confirming his suspicion. A fleet of ships had appeared out of nowhere, trailing them through space. Lyra's eyes flashed with a dangerous gleam. I knew they wouldn't let me go that easily. Jace's fingers flew over the controls, trying to calculate their best escape route. But it was no use. The enemy ships were already closing in. Get ready, he said, looking over at Lyra. This is going to get rough. The first blast hit their ship with a deafening roar. The hull groaned under the force and the ship lurched violently to the side. Jace cursed under his breath as he struggled to keep the ship steady. He fired back, targeting the lead enemy ship, but they were outnumbered. The enemy was relentless, their weapons more advanced than anything Jace had faced before. Lyra didn't flinch. She rose from her seat, her eyes cold and focused. I'll handle the weapons. You focus on flying. Without waiting for Jace to respond, she moved to the weapons console. Her fingers flew over the controls with a practiced ease, and soon, the enemy ships were under heavy fire. But even with her precision, it was clear they couldn't hold them off forever. Do you have a plan? Jace asked, his voice tight with urgency. Lyra didn't look at him as she fired again. I always have a plan. But the enemy was closing in faster than they could retaliate. Jace's heart raced as he pushed the ship to its limits, the stars outside a blur. He knew they couldn't outrun them forever. They needed to find a way out fast. Suddenly, a sharp beep echoed through the ship. Jace looked at the radar, his heart skipping a beat. A massive asteroid field was ahead. A perfect hiding place, but also a dangerous one. They would be flying blind in there. Hang on, Jace muttered, his hands gripping the controls. He veered the ship toward the asteroid field, hoping it was their only chance to escape. As they entered the field, the enemy ships hesitated, their sensors unable to track them through the dense debris. Now, Jace shouted, pulling the ship into a sharp turn. Lyra fired one final blast, disabling the lead enemy ship, just as they entered the asteroid field. The remaining ships followed, but they were slower. For a moment, everything seemed still, the only sound the hum of the engines and the rush of space outside the ship's hull. That's it, Jace said, his voice steady. We lost them. Lyra gave him a brief, sharp nod. For now. The asteroid field was dense with debris, swirling rocks and floating fragments from broken ships. Jace's fingers gripped the controls as he skillfully navigated the narrow gaps between the asteroids. His heart pounded in his chest as he glanced at the radar. The enemy ships were still on their tail, but their chances of catching up were slim. The dense asteroid field made it almost impossible to track them, and Jace knew it was their best chance to lose the pursuers. Lyra stood behind him, her focus never leaving the weapons console. Her sharp eyes scanned the incoming threats, her fingers moving quickly across the control panel as she fired back at the enemy ships. The blasts rocked the pursuers, but they were relentless. The enemy wasn't giving up. How much longer can we keep this up? Jace asked, his voice tense. He had been flying through the field for what felt like hours, his mind constantly calculating their best route to evade the enemy. Not much longer, Lyra replied, her voice calm but steady. They'll eventually find a way to corner us. We need to make it to the surface, fast. Surface? Jace turned to look at her, surprise in his eyes. You're saying there's a planet here? She nodded, not looking away from her task. Yes, the hidden base I mentioned earlier. It's on the surface of one of the moons in this system. It's the only place we can go where we'll be safe if we make it there in time. Jace's mind raced as he considered the situation. They were running out of options. The asteroid field wouldn't protect them forever. The enemy was too close, and if they couldn't shake them off, they would have no choice but to face them head-on. It wasn't a battle he was prepared to fight. Hold on, Jace shouted as he pushed the throttle forward, sending the ship plunging deeper into the asteroid field. The ship rocked violently as asteroid fragments scraped against the hull. He fought to keep the ship steady, his mind racing through the calculations. The radar beeped loudly, warning them of incoming enemy ships. Jace swore under his breath. There were too many of them. It was clear now that they weren't just chasing them. They were trying to capture them. They wanted something more than just Lyra's blood or the information she carried. They were after whatever lay hidden in the base. Can you do something about those ships? Jace asked, his eyes scanning the monitors. Lyra's face was set in determination as she fired at the enemy ships, her hands moving quickly and precisely. I'm trying, she replied, her tone steady. But I can only delay them. If we don't make it to the surface soon, we'll be sitting ducks. Jace didn't need any more encouragement. He slammed the ship into full speed, darting between the massive asteroids. The enemy ships were closing in fast, their weapons lighting up the space behind them. A series of blasts shook the ship, and Jace gripped the controls tighter, keeping the ship steady despite the shaking. We're almost there, Lyra called out, her voice full of urgency. Jace could see it now, an uncharted moon, small and barren but with a surface that seemed to shimmer in the distance. The base was there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for them. He could only pray that they would make it before the enemy did. Hold on, Jace shouted as he made a sharp turn, aiming the ship toward the moon's surface. The enemy ships followed, but they were far behind. They couldn't keep up with his speed in the asteroid field. It was now or never. The ship broke through the asteroid field and the moon's surface loomed large before them. Jace didn't hesitate. He punched the controls, sending the ship crashing toward the surface at high speed. He braced himself for the landing, but his focus never wavered. He knew they had to make it inside the base before the enemy could land. The ship hit the surface with a heavy thud, sending a shockwave through the cockpit. The ship bounced once, then settled, skidding to a halt. Dust swirled around them, and Jace quickly powered down the engines. We're here, Jace said, his voice tense but relieved. Now what? Lyra didn't answer immediately. She was already unbuckling her harness and moving to the door. We don't have time to wait, she said. We need to get inside the base before they catch up. Jace followed her, his hand on his weapon as they made their way toward the exit. They were in the middle of nowhere, on a moon that wasn't even supposed to be on any maps. The base was their only hope, but they needed to act fast. The door to the ship opened with a hiss and they stepped out into the dust-covered landscape. The wind howled around them, the only sound other than their footsteps. Lyra led the way, her steps quick and purposeful. We're close, she said, glancing back at Jace. The entrance is just ahead. Jace kept his eyes on their surroundings, scanning for any sign of the enemy. They had landed in a hidden valley, surrounded by rocky cliffs, and the base was buried beneath the surface. But if the enemy had followed them here, they would be in danger. The entrance to the base wasn't far, but they had to move quickly. They reached the entrance, an old rusted door hidden beneath the rocks. Lyra tapped a code into the panel and the door slowly creaked open, revealing a dark passageway inside. "After you," Jace said, stepping aside to let her enter first. He wasn't sure if he could trust her fully yet, but he knew one thing for sure. She was the only one who could lead them to safety. Lyra stepped inside without hesitation, her expression unreadable. Jace followed close behind, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. They moved through the narrow passage, the walls cold and metal. It was clear that this place hadn't been used in years, but it was still intact. They reached a control room and Lyra quickly began to activate the systems. The lights flickered on, and the room hummed with life as the power kicked in. "We're in," Lyra said, a small sigh of relief escaping her lips. But before Jace could respond, a voice crackled through the comms. "Lyra, you shouldn't have come here." The voice was cold, and Jace's blood ran cold at the sound of it. He turned to Lyra, his eyes wide with shock. She turned to face him, her face pale. "It's him," she whispered. "The one I've been running from." Jace stepped forward, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. He wasn't sure who this person was, but if they were after Lyra, they were about to face a fight. Lyra's eyes were full of regret, and she stepped away from the controls. "I didn't want you involved in this," she said quietly. "But now you are, and there's no turning back." Jace didn't have time to process her words. The door behind them slammed shut and they heard the sound of footsteps echoing in the corridor. "The enemy was here." "You should have stayed away, Commander," the voice said again, louder this time. "Now you'll both pay the price."